I'm delighted to be here today on behalf of BIS and to bring a perspective of government policy to the discussions. We're talking, when we say innovation, about the translation of those ideas, those inventions, into applications which can make a difference to the economy, to public services, to public policy, whatever the application might be. I'm going to give you a fairly broad overview this morning. There's always a risk then of being rather shallow and broad, but it's only the start of the day. There's plenty of time later. And I'll go a little bit into one part of my responsibilities, which is the connection between innovation policy and local growth policy and local economic development. But starting right at the broad level, I wanted to start by saying that the UK is pretty good at innovation. I'm not sure we say that often enough, but we've made a lot of progress over recent years in terms of our innovation performance. It's a bit harder to agree on exactly what metric to use to demonstrate that, but there are some. David's explained what the Technology Strategy Board has done since its creation as an executive body in 2007. There's been a lot of work to encourage our academic base to focus increasingly on the real-world impact of their research, as well as taking forward the boundary of knowledge, and that's made a lot of difference. So pick your own metrics, but here's one, which seems to be reasonably well regarded as meaningful and robust, and the bars speak for themselves. Certainly in the last 4 years of data, the UK's position in terms of the rankings of this particular index have steadily improved. So we're good at innovation and we're getting better. Innovation is absolutely central to the future of the economy, and government understands that in the way it's approaching economic growth. It won't have escaped your attention that economic growth is the fundamental objective, the key objective of the coalition government, and we all know why. And as the centrepiece of that economic strategy, as David's already mentioned, is industrial strategy. And innovation is all the way through industrial strategy. You will have seen the coverage of yesterday's conference that both John Cridland and Vince Cable were speaking at. And the aspect of industrial strategy you've probably heard about is the sector strategies, where government has identified 11 sectors which it believes are particularly important to the future of the economy. And if you glance through those sector strategies, which have now all been published, you will see that research and development features in some shape or form in just about all of them. And where they are about further investment by the private sector or by the public sector, it's about investment in R&D. Innovation is all the way through this. And it's not all about the sector strategies either. The whole thing is about creating a greater degree of long-term certainty to support long-term investment planning. And that means that some of it is about not just the established sectors of today, but the opportunities for the future further away, which means there's a particular focus on technologies, areas of technology with a cross-cutting ability to shape the economic future of the UK, where we've got a particular strength. Alongside procurement, which David already mentioned in terms of SBRI, skills and access to finance, which all have their own role to play in innovation. Again, innovation is all the way through this. So that technology strand is framed to a large extent around 8 great technologies, a phrase coined by David Willits and explained by the Chancellor in his speech to the Royal Society last November. And these are areas where the UK has particular research depth and industrial capability to do something about it. Some of them are a little bit further upstream than some of the obvious opportunities facing the UK today. And the government announced in the autumn statement last year £600 million of investment in these areas. And those link, not perfectly, but in pretty obvious ways when you start looking at them, to the Catapult Centres, which again David mentioned, which are a really important bridge between the innovation base and the development of new ways of doing things through to scale application in commercialisation. In several of these areas, we're developing world-leading capability and making it available to any firm that's in the field, including small enterprises. It's a really good example of open access innovation, and a lot of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with some of these because clearly Catapult Centres exist in places and some other places around here. I'm trying to give a picture of where government strategy is on innovation and how it's supporting it. The coalition government articulated its overall approach to innovation back in 2011 in the Innovation and Research Strategy for Growth, which picked up on a number of these ideas and set them all out in a structure. Some we haven't touched on this morning yet, like innovation prizes, as a way of pulling forward development in kind of long-term challenges that we can see as being important. The role of the public sector in driving innovation through procurement is one that David's already picked up on. And that was all underpinned by an economics paper which has been pretty well received. And that commitment to supporting innovation has been followed through this year in the spending review decisions, where government has extended the cash protection of the science resource budget for a further year, introduced a longer-term settlement for capital for science, which is really important in enabling decisions on capital projects which take several years to complete or several years to fulfil their potential. And as David mentions, a really substantial increase in the budget for the Technology Strategy Board, which is a pretty bold decision in a one-year spending review. It might not always sound terribly generous to be protecting the science budget in cash terms, but in the current fiscal environment, it's pretty generous. Very few budgets did any better than that this year. It's a difficult environment for government spending, and science is really up there as a priority. And the reasons why the Technology Strategy Board has been singled out as for positive treatment in the spending review is that it's doing such an important job. David's done a better job than I have, than I'm going to, of explaining what it does and how it does that. But David started by saying it's the UK's innovation agency, and he's not wrong. That's the role that it plays. It's the principal mechanism by which government supports innovation in the economy. That's very important. So far, so good. The UK is good at innovation. We're getting better. Government understands the way in which it wants to support innovation in the economy. It's seeing that through. It's reflecting that in the decisions it takes about public spending. And the Technology Strategy Board is performing and improving in the way it supports innovation in the economy. But it's a good job we're getting better, because there's some competition out there. The rest of the world is putting more money into innovation than we're able to at the moment. And I don't mean we government, I mean the country. This is a chart of investment in research and development by all sectors, private, public and charity, over the last, 7 years. And before it confuses you, the three lines that are dashed, the United States, China and Japan, are against the right axis. So they're much higher than all the other figures. It's just if you put them all on a single axis, you can barely see what's happening to the lower ones. You will notice an upward trend in several of the lines. So take Germany as an example, the green one. Started out in 2005 at about, 65 million US dollars, and by 2011 was about 79 million US dollars in 2005 money. This is real terms. Look at the UK line in blue, starts about 35, finishes about 36. We are not able at the moment, for whatever reason, and we can have a long conversation about why the private sector isn't investing any more than that in R&D in the UK, but we don't seem to be able to do more than flatline in terms of our performance in input terms. Inputs aren't a measure of performance. but they're one of the few leading indicators we've got. The output, the outcome performance is pretty good, but by the time it shows in the figures, you're normally looking at things that happened 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago in some cases, depending on what measures you're looking at. So we need to be careful that we're doing as well as we can if we're not going to be knocked off our perch. And that's where this gentleman comes in. Earlier in the year, when the response to the Lord Heseltine's review of local economic development was published, the government asked Sir Andrew Whitty to look at the role that universities can play in local economic growth, in industrial strategy, in working with local enterprise partnerships. And he was pretty keen to do so because it's a bugbear of his. You'll know that, or some of you will know that Sir Andrew Whitty is the lead non-executive director on the BIS departmental board, as well as his day job as chief executive of GlaxoSmithKline. And sitting in a global multinational with a significant intensity in R&D efforts, like several other multinationals, GSK chooses to put a disproportionate amount of its R&D investment in the UK. You'll probably hear more about that in the next session when Procter & Gamble are talking about their relationship with Durham. Which is great news, because that's an indication of the strength of the UK's academic base and the way we translate that into real-world outputs. And Sir Andrew sees that university strength and thinks we can do more with it. That if we can identify, now we've said something about which are priority sectors and technologies for the UK economy going forwards, which are the universities that have world-leading expertise in those areas, and how can we organise ourselves so that we're all aligned and the rest of the country is mobilised behind that expertise and making the most of our comparative advantage. And universities do have a very important role to play in the local economy. I'm not going to read this slide out. Universities are all different, and they all work in their local economies in different ways. But it's interesting that most of them, by a long stretch, choose to be active in supporting their local economy, whether it's through knowledge transfer, through supporting entrepreneurship, through civic leadership, all kinds of different mechanisms. But most of them do it. And they play a very important role, and probably more so now that we don't have regional development agencies. That leaves some obvious gaps in the landscape, well, compared to the way it used to be. I'm not making any point about whether it's a good or a bad thing, merely observing that there's an opportunity for universities to provide some of that leadership. So in Sir Andrew Whitty's preliminary findings, which are really more about the themes that he wants to explore in the report, and we'll see that in a few weeks' time. There's a running theme about enhancing the role that universities play in developing growth strategies for the local area and reflecting the national industrial strategy and getting them all lined up, as well as ensuring that the national agencies like the TSB and UK Trade and Investment and so on are aligned with the same picture. How is all that going to be funded? In a world where the fiscal environment is pretty difficult and there aren't obvious pots of new money around. Well, one of the potential answers, though I'm not saying by any stretch it's the only one, is the European structural funds, which have now, the amounts that are going to be available are now settled. Each local enterprise partnership in England knows what its allocation is for the next period. And it is broadly in the hands of LEPs to decide how to use that money. And that's a very important role that they play, because we're being expected by the European Union, and rightly so, to have a way of looking at our structural funds policy, our programme, that identifies genuine local strengths and builds on them, called smart specialisation, and John's one of the experts on it, so I'll be careful what I say and finish quickly. The way that local enterprise partnerships have been given so much autonomy means that we are reliant on the way that they approach their strategies in order that the whole country has a sensible strategy to submit to Europe. So they have an important role to play. Again, now that RDAs and their budgets have gone, there will need to be some creative thinking about where the match funding comes from for these projects, because European regional development funds, as many of you will know, only ever pay for half of anything. And somebody will need to put forward those projects and make a programme out of them. And in the innovation field, one of the obvious candidates is the university base again. So universities have a really important role to play in this field. So I'm not making too much song and dance about this. It's not the be-all and end-all. But if we are going to have an effective innovation programme from European structural and investment funds over the next period in European terms is a 7-year budget starting in January, then we're going to be reliant on local partners, including LEPs and universities, to make that happen. The role of national agencies in that, Technology Strategy Board as well as the Research Councils, HEFCI and others, is an interesting one because their mission is not about local economic development. Their mission is about investing in excellence and the future of the UK. But at the same time, they all understand why it's important, and they all recognise that innovation happens in places, and are interested and keen to work with people to formulate a programme that makes sense. So David shared some feedback that the TSB itself has had about sometimes coming across as bureaucratic and explaining why that is. I know that it's also had some feedback that it can be, now that the RDAs are not there to kind of provide that brokering, it's sometimes seen as a bit distant to local areas. That's not by design, it's not by intention, and I know colleagues in the TSB are happy to talk to people about how they can help, but they're not in the business of carving out particular pots of money to give to particular places because of the mechanisms that David talked about for selecting the projects they invest in. So, in summary, we're good at innovation, we're getting better. Government understands what it's doing to support innovation and is backing that up with spending decisions. It's a good job we're getting better because other countries are able to invest more money in research and development. And if we believe Andrew Whitty, then if we can align the strength of our universities, the choices in our industrial strategy, and the local strategies that are put together for investment, then we'll be able to make more of our comparative advantage in the world. Which is my way of saying, as Paul Nurse says, we will have to compete with our brains and with our science in what the Prime Minister refers to as a global race. Thank you very much.